have this vivid memory of sitting in the bathtub one time and just crying.
I think I punched my dad once.
You're not in charge of me right now. Like, you just won't leave me alone.
I had an epidural in my back, so I couldn't move very well.
She just wanted me to keep pushing and keep going.
Everybody had one. Like, if you didn't have one, you were looked down upon.
This is a show where teenagers share their experiences growing up in today's world. I'm your host, Dr. RJ, and this is A Teen's Perspective. Welcome to A Teen's Perspective, helping parents see the future. I'm your host, Dr. RJ Jackson, and today I have one of my friends. I had a chance to work closely with Frank in our church group, and we spent a lot of time together, 6th grade through 8th grade. So I want to go ahead and introduce Frank. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and where you are today.
Hey, I'm Frank, and I'm a camera salesman first. I do professional photography and just graduated high school 6 months ago now. I'm loving life so far.
As I mentioned, Frank and I used to go to the same church, and I was his youth group leader. Yeah, I remember you made my life easier because they had some knuckleheads in my group, but Frank was the voice of reason. And he didn't mind standing up against the opposition of wanting to do things the wrong way, I would say. Frank was very helpful in that sense. Maybe share with us just your upbringing, your parents' style of parenting.
Yeah, for sure. So my parents, I came up in a very Christian household, so very God-centered, which for them meant they really taught me to be selfless going through school, as much as they could at least, which did pretty good. I went to public school for elementary, and then for 6th grade, I went to a charter school, and from 7th grade onward, I actually did online schooling. So I was home for most of my school. It's a little different than full homeschooling, but it's the same idea. I was home, and I didn't have a ton of social interaction. So that meant I had tons of time with my parents. My dad stayed at home through middle school, and my mom only works 3 days a week. She's an ICU nurse. Big family values in my house. So we all really love each other. I'm really close with my sister. I only have one sibling. She's 2 years older than me, and she moved to New York. She's doing computer animation up in New York.
Wow, that's cool.
It's a little bit of a shock for me because it all happened so fast, but we all love each other a lot, and my parents really did a great job bringing me up in a way that really focuses on family first.
Yeah, and how was it growing up homeschooled in a sense?
Yeah. It was interesting because you don't get the social life that most kids are used to, so you really have to seek that out. And what that meant for my parents is they really put me in a lot of situations, or especially my dad. He really pushed me to be in a lot of situations where I might have been uncomfortable at first, but it really taught me how to socialize and build social skills with other people. So when I was in middle school, he would really push me to talk to my teachers, which we still had teachers, even though it's online school, we still had teachers to oversee our work. He really pushed me to talk to them and treat them like humans rather than just another computer. So that was really nice. And it was a breath of fresh air, not only for me, but also for my teachers, because for the rest of the kids, a lot of them didn't do that. Through high school, I actually went to Austin Community College and did college as a 15-year-old. I was going and taking sociology alongside adults, which really built up my social skills and exposed me the nastier sides of reality, but it also helped build how I present myself to others.
Yeah, so give me an example when you say the nastier sides of reality.
The big one is I had a professor that, as much as I didn't like the class and as much as I wish I never had to take it, I do credit to how thick-skinned I am today. Especially I'm in sales, and sales is pretty cutthroat. If it wasn't for him, I definitely wouldn't be here. But he didn't have a problem targeting me as a 15-year-old. He treated me differently in a bad way because he didn't think I should be in his classroom because I was 15. There was a lot of prejudice. He also thought because I was a Christian, I couldn't understand certain values, which was baffling that you could do that at a public college, but here we are. And I mean, that's the difference between college and high school is people can express their views in that way, almost be safe about it.
So how did your parents react to that information?
They were supportive of me first. They made sure that I knew I was loved, but they didn't want to pull me out. They urged me to keep going and to grow through it rather than run away from it. Really helped me a ton.
You mentioned that you felt loved. Give us some examples of what that looks like.
For me, what that looked like was they really took time to listen to me and listen to what I didn't like about it. And they understood that they didn't dismiss my concerns. So they realized that my situation that I was going through in college or in that scenario, it was a little unique and that they couldn't fully understand it since they weren't there. So they actually listened to that and said, you know what, you might be right. We're going to support you as much as we can through this, but we're also going to try to support you in a way that you can continue doing this.
Yeah. And what I noticed when I'm coaching teens is that's actually a big deal that you brought up as far as the support through situations, because sometimes teens can feel that the parents are more talking at them and not necessarily like truly trying to understand. So that's awesome that your parents was there for you and tried to hear it from your point of view, even if they didn't understand it.
For sure, especially between me and my friends. I didn't realize how unique that was until I started talking to them. But the fact that my parents really took the time to go and understand my situation rather than dismiss it was a really big deal to me.
Yeah. Now you mentioned friends. So how do you make friends as a homeschool kid?
You don't. My social life was pretty bad. Now, I still have my core group of friends. So I have some from church that I still know. And then I have some that I've known my entire life from on my street or just family friends, acquaintances that have just grown into really my core group of guys I go to. So I've kept those, obviously, but I don't have a ton of, or I didn't have a ton of loose friends. If I didn't have somebody to hang out with, it wasn't like I could go to a party where one of my friends was at. It was a little lonely at times. It's not like I could make any at college because they were all 10 years older than me. So especially at a community college. Yeah.
Hanging out with this one 20 years older.
Yeah. They weren't trying to catch a case or anything. Yeah. It was a little different having that as my social circle, so to speak.
Now, with social media, does that help in the fact of, is it possible to make friends that way?
Making friends over social media isn't truly possible. I think you can connect with somebody and you can talk to them over social media, but you can never actually be a close friend with somebody over social media. You can maintain a friendship over social media, and I think that's what it's really good for. If you meet somebody in real life and face to face, and then you can keep up with them over social media. For example, I've reconnected with some really old friends, even from elementary school, over social media that I talk to on a weekly or bi-weekly basis now, which is amazing that we have that ability to do that. Otherwise, I never would have seen them again. And I still keep up with some people that I don't see on a weekly basis anymore or a daily basis because I'm not in activities with them anymore. I have a full-time job. So I don't necessarily have the free time to go hang out with them. And social media kind of gives me the ability to keep up with them. But I wouldn't say it actually is a good tool to make friends that I would necessarily trust.
So basically your closest friends are the ones that were on your street that you grew up near. Mm-hmm. Outside of that, it's very difficult to make friends.
Yeah, you really have to put yourself into situations to make friends now.
Now, being homeschooled, what about sports?
I used to be a sports guy. I did BMX growing up and used to race that with some guys I knew really close. And that kind of faded off when I was in fifth grade. At the end of fifth grade, I was diagnosed with congenital heart defect, which basically means I had a hole between the two chambers of my heart. And I had open heart surgery, and that put an end to my sporting ambitions. And so for a year there, I really couldn't do anything in the way of sports. And when I was in online school, I wasn't really into chasing down any league sports or private leagues or anything like that. I would rather stay in the garage and work on my car. So.
Yeah. And just for the parents who this concept of homeschool may be pretty foreign, because I know in Texas, it's actually very popular in Texas, but not everywhere. Can you share what you mentioned about school sports that you can still participate in?
In Texas, it's a little unique. In some areas, in some districts, you can participate in actual public school sports, even if you're homeschooled. But for the most part, especially in Texas, since it's so popular, they have a lot of leagues, so private leagues. They'll have actual, basically a company that runs a soccer league for kids in this age range, which can be nice sometimes. It's really great for the people that are enthusiastic about that sport. But if you're going at it casually, a lot of times it's a lot of money and it's a lot of time that you have to put into something that doesn't necessarily transfer over to school. It makes it hard to find it reasonable for a lot of homeschoolers, which is kind of sad because I feel like there's a big experience that you're missing out on there.
Now, you mentioned that you prefer to stay home or in the garage and work on your car.
Yeah.
So talk to us about that.
So that was a big thing with my dad and I, and that's why part of the reason why we're so close is he and I, ever since I was like 4, he'd bring me into the garage and he'd teach me how to work on cars. So at 5, I was doing brake jobs on our old Ford Explorer, and by 16, I had owned, 4 Mazda Miatas. And now I've had 6, and I'm 18, and I've flipped them all. I've made money off of them. But working on bikes, cars, motorcycles, stuff like that has just been a real bonding time between my dad and I. And it went from a bonding time to a really great, almost stress relief for me. I could go out into the garage, turn on some music, and wrench away on a car and have a visible result that really felt good when you compare that to high school, where it's like, oh yeah, let's just complete another paper and just the same thing over and over and over again.
Now, that bonding experience that you and your father shared, how important do you feel that has been as far as developing to where you are now?
Oh, extremely important. I think without that, it would be a lot harder or it would have been a lot harder for me to get through high school and maintain a healthy relationship with him. Because, I mean, obviously you're going to have a lot of stress through high school. And the fact that I was homeschooled amplified that between my dad and I, because we were spending all time together. I mean, he was my learning coach. He was the guy that helped guide me through high school. He was, in a sense, my teacher for every subject. So with that, I can't hate my teachers. It turns into, there's just a lot of stress in the house. If we hadn't worked so hard to build that relationship between us early on and to have an outlet that we both shared, I think it would have been really hard to stay close with my dad through high school.
Yeah, so talk to us more about that, about this dynamic to have your dad teaching every subject and possibly tension from that.
Yeah, it's definitely a strange scenario, isn't it? I know my sister, she did public school for the first 2 grades of middle school. And with that, there was a lot of tension, but it was a different type. It was almost like they wanted to change something that was happening outside the house. My parents wanted to change something because they saw her suffering. They saw her getting upset every time she came home and getting stressed from homework. And that all turns inside out when you start having it in the house. So it was just, I would get mad at my dad for wanting me to do this on a schedule. I would get mad at my dad for making me want to get my grades up. I would get mad at my dad for pretty much everything. And then you'd also have, chores. Oh, my room isn't clean. Oh, I need to fix this on this car. Oh, I need to clean up the garage. And you need to clean up your plates. So you have all that groups together. And it was definitely an interesting dynamic. And it took a lot of patience on his part and a lot of growing on my part.
That actually makes sense for the simple fact that your dad having to wear several hats.
Yeah.
And very difficult to distinguish between the different hats. In 1 minute it's homework, but then go do some chores. I'm trying to teach you, but you need to do this. And I can see how that can be very difficult.
Yeah, the big thing that was difficult, I think, for us, especially in the past year, was transitioning from teacher. So as a father, like he had, especially teaching my sister and I, he was in that mode for almost 7 years of just teaching us. So teaching school, teaching life lessons, teaching how to do our chores, how to fix cars, how to build computers, whatever it is. Teaching, he had to switch from that teaching mode into being a friend to me. So being able to just sit down and listen to me, and instead of trying to teach me what I'm doing wrong, just listening and saying, yeah, you're right.
At what age did you notice that transition?
Senior year.
He was seeing that you were leaving pretty soon, so it's time to...
Exactly. Well, and the weird thing is, my mom, since she worked, it wasn't that bad of a transition with her. And since she wasn't our teacher, she didn't really have a whole lot to do with our schooling. So since she worked, my dad always emphasized, hey, take care of your mom first. Like, don't make her feel the stress of school. She already has enough stress, especially as an ICU nurse. And for us, it was very centric of taking care, especially the women in our household. So me taking care of Claire, my sister, and then taking care of my mom. But as far as it goes with my dad, it took a lot of transitioning with him and a lot of effort on my part and my mom's part to both edge him towards that friendship part. Because that's what I knew I wanted that. I knew I wanted him to be my friend rather than just be my dad all the time. And especially when I saw the relationship his dad and he had. They would call each other almost every day. There was never a reason. It was just, let's catch up. Let's talk about life. And let's make sure we're both okay. And I wanted that with my dad. And my mom wanted that. That's what I had with my mom all along, because since she worked, she didn't have as much of that stress coming off of school. I think I wanted that with my dad as well. So I started really pushing for that towards the middle of senior year.
And what do you think was the more of the aha moment for your dad to transition?
Honestly, I think it's when I got a full-time job. After I graduated and after I got a full-time job and started just working, my dad kind of went from, all right, I need to start teaching this kid. He went from that to, all right, this kid has it figured out. Like, he's working in full-time and I was making good money and I could start taking care of myself, and I didn't have to ask them for money all the time. I didn't have to ask them if I could do stuff. Now I have a car and I paid for that myself, going through, and I can pay for my own bills. I can pay for my own phone. He stopped going from I'm responsible for him to he's responsible for himself.
And it was that more like the respect.
Yeah. And especially man to man, it was, okay, you're not a boy anymore. Like, now, I mean, there's still a little bit of that. I still live in the house, so I haven't moved out quite yet.
That has just been financially smart.
It is. It is. All my friends, leech. And my parents love it too. It would be an empty house if my sister and I were both moved out. Ooh, that'd be way too many square feet for two people.
So talk to us about the feeling when you first were able to pay for your own bills and feel like you're your own man.
It felt really good, especially I would go to a restaurant, and I remember the first time I took my parents out to dinner. It felt really good. I wasn't like, I made it, because I hadn't. But when I took them out to dinner, it felt really good to do that and to pay it back to them and go, even if it's just a dinner, it meant so much more than just a $30 dinner. It was really cool to be able to do that. And it felt really good, not even the money side of things, but more of the, y'all don't have to worry about me anymore. Like, they're still gonna, because they're parents.
Yeah,
like, they
parents.
love me. Anybody that loves somebody is gonna worry about them. But they didn't have to anymore, which I liked.
So you mentioned that your dad had to be the one to teach you life lessons. So what do you think at this age was the most important life lesson he shared with you?
Oh man, so many. But the biggest one, I think, is probably just learning to manage yourself before you go and try to manage others. So learning to get your affairs in line before you go trying to mess with other people's lives.
Yeah. Give us an example of how you've used that.
Ooh, I'll give you an example of how I tried to use it.
Okay,
you know, with finances especially. That's the big one. So in our house, especially growing up with my dad being an executive in the tech industry, it was a really rough time going through 2008 through 2012. Our family went from a really well-off family to, oh no, maybe we're not so well off, really fast. So the only reason we stayed stable was because he had managed money so well and he built up a savings account. And for me, I think a lot of that is knowing to not spend down to the last penny in the bank account and knowing what financial decisions I'm making and what's an investment and what's just throwing money away. For example, I'm doing photography, so running a photography business. I know what equipment I should buy and how I'm going to make my money back on that equipment rather than just buying equipment because that's what everybody else has. Actually sleeping on decisions and not just buying impulsively and really thinking about things and thinking through things before I go and just do them is a really big part of what he's taught me. And I think that plays into getting my own ducks in a row. Because if I am messed up, if my finances are down to the last penny, then I can't help out my friends. I can't help out my family. I just bought my mom a new phone.
Oh, man, that must have been a great feeling.
Yeah, it was a good present. I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was spending all my money on myself and being selfish with my money and doing all that. So learning to manage yourself so you can help others.
How did your dad really get you to buy in on that? Parents tell kids things all the time. How did you choose that one to hold on to and apply?
Oh man, my parents wouldn't buy me anything. So I always had to work for what I wanted. So what that meant is everything I bought had an emotional attachment to it. So it was, oh, I bought this Game Boy. I worked really hard for that. That's how many lawns did I mow for that? And if I bought a computer, it was how many Miatas did I sell to get that? For me, it was work behind everything that I bought. And for me, what that meant is there's value to everything I bought. Now, unfortunately, that also means I own way too many things and I don't get rid of anything. But that's a separate issue that my dad and I both share, ironically. But it's the idea of he didn't want me to think that anything was given to me. Now, he would loan me money. There would be times where he would have to loan me stuff. Let's say I'm making a bigger purchase, like a car. When I got my first Miata, he loaned me, I think it was $350 for the first one, which is amazing that I got a car for $350. But it was broken. I had to work on it and I had to pay him back everything. So he would keep a spreadsheet of every cost I had into it and I'd pay him every month. I'd pay it off.
So what was your feeling at that time? Like now you're an adult and you can kind of look back and say, okay, I appreciate that. But when you were a child in it, what was your attitude? What were your emotions?
First of all, it was gratefulness that he lent me the money. That was really cool. But I also think there was a lot of stress behind that as well, because now my father, my teacher, my chore enforcer became also my bank. And he also held the keys to my car. So that added a lot of stress there, which we didn't do again. We did it a few times and then we were like, you know what? That's enough fighting. As a kid, it really taught me the tough part of financing. You have to pay things off. You actually have to pay money for things. And there's a lot of work that goes into getting that money. And I think transitioning from that into photography was a little weird because for photography, it came so easily to me and people were so willing to throw money towards it. I didn't really realize what I was worth when I started doing that. And if it hadn't been for my dad kind of teaching me what money was worth, I don't think I could have done photography at all, because I think I would have started saying, you're a great friend, I'll do it for free. And it would have fallen into this trap of doing professional level photos for free. And I never could have paid back my equipment. I never could have grown my business at all. And I certainly wouldn't be where I am today.
Yeah, let's switch gears. You mentioned there were a lot of arguments and fights in the household. So talk to us about discipline in your household and boundaries that your parents set up for you guys.
As far as discipline goes, as a kid, I remember there's a lot of grounding, like elementary school level. I remember a lot of grounding. My dad isn't the quietest of people, so he didn't have
yelling.
Yeah, he didn't have a problem yelling, and I didn't have a problem yelling back as sassy little middle school Frank. But it was definitely, there were some times where it was very high strung.
And what boundaries? Like, how do you know like how far you could go? Because me growing up, it would never have crossed my mind to even think about raising my voice to my dad, because he was very military, very structured, and we just had that fear of him. How did you know like how far you could go before you crossed the line?
There were a few times where I didn't care where the line was. I kind of drew the line at physical contact. I think I punched my dad once. That made me feel sick to my stomach for the longest time. And even bringing it up now is, how could I do that to a man I love so much, right? And who's done so much for me. But other than that, I think just yelling and yelling back, especially as a kid, it feels great. Like, yeah, I'm beating the system. But then like immediately afterwards, it feels terrible because you know how much those people have done for you. And then especially when you start seeing them, like my mom, she hated that. And she wouldn't get mad at me. She would just get really sad about it because that's her baby, getting mad at her, at her husband, at everything about it. She hated it, and rightfully so. And when I started seeing that, I think that's where I knew where the boundary was and where it had to stop.
And thanks for bringing that up, honestly. Most parents do not know the thoughts and the feelings of a teenager who may be angry with them. The fact that you admit it, I felt terrible after I did that. I think a lot of parents wouldn't have guessed that. I do want to talk to you about a difficult time in your life. Mm-hmm. And I was slightly a part of it because I remember when we were in that group and then you had to leave for some time. So talk to us about the diagnosis, the procedure. I mean, just your thoughts through all that time.
Oh man, for the heart surgery. Whew. That was a very turbulent year in my life. It started at the end of 5th grade when I actually got diagnosed with appendicitis. So I missed the last 2 days of school, the 2 party days I missed, of course. I was coming off of a lot of bullying towards the end of school. So I was in a really low place mentally. It was almost to the point where I wanted myself to be sick so I didn't have to go to school and talk to some people. I never could run in elementary school. Like I could run a third of a mile and then I'd have to stop because I had like terrible asthma, which we later found out was because of the heart, which makes sense. When I went in for my appendectomy, it went really south. It had burst way in advance, and my mom, being an ICU nurse, stayed there by my side for 3.5 weeks. Only missed one night to go home and unwind. A lot of things went wrong that night, so she came back and never missed another night. Basically, they ended up having to do a whole lot. I think it was 4 or 5 different surgeries within 3 weeks. A lot of scans, a lot of tears, a lot of trauma, and not a fun time. But while she was in there, she was bored and she was listening to my heart, and she heard a gallop in my heartbeat and told them to check it out. And they were like writing it off as psychotic mom. And she finally got a cardiologist to come in and take a look, and they found out I had that hole in my heart. Complete shock to a lot of the nurses there, and complete shock to me being the kid that was like looking forward to getting out after 3.5 weeks. And then it's like, nope, you got a hole in your heart, dude. And it was 11 millimeters, so just over a centimeter between the 2 chambers in my heart. Because of insurance, which money is the worst, right? They wanted to do the operation the same year. They were pushing to get it done immediately, the hospital I was at, but we decided to push it back a little bit and to find the right one. We ended up going down to Houston and doing the operation down there. One of the best surgeons in the country for pediatric heart stuff. I was in and out in 3 days.
3 days.
Open heart surgery. I have a 6-inch incision across my sternum in 3 days. I was so mad at life at the time. I was just tired of being sick. And then I felt like it was just a 1-2 punch after getting hit with appendicitis and being in the hospital for almost a month. And then being hit with a hole in my heart. It was just, it felt like there was a hole in my heart. Like it didn't feel right that could actually happen in my life. And especially after being bullied, it was a really hard time. And I struggled a lot with depression, but I was never a kid that was depressed. I was always the kid that was almost the leader. So I couldn't be depressed in a sense. Like I felt like it wouldn't be right for me to be depressed. So I just survived and I kept going. I know I was in and out with church and small groups and all that. And I know a lot of guys came to see me when I was in the hospital, and it really kept my morale strong while I was in the hospital for those things. Not only my direct family, but also my extended family really supported me. And when I was in for my heart surgery, I felt so loved in that moment and everybody was happy for me getting through it. I kind of forgot about the depression for a while. Even though it was a miracle that my mom found that hole in my heart, I didn't see that as a 12-year-old. I was just mad about it. I was like, I don't want any more medical problems. I just want to be okay. Going through that really changed my life because it really taught me that there are better things on the other side of the fence. Even if it seems like a real hard battle right now, if you stick through it, it gets a lot better. Once I recovered and once I got all my muscle back, because I looked like a skeleton, man. It was skin on bone because I'd been sitting in a hospital bed for 3.5 weeks. I had to relearn how to walk. And I just remember using my IV pole as basically a walker. And I couldn't push my own wheelchair. I was that weak. It felt really vulnerable as a 12-year-old that saw himself as somewhat athletic, being that I raced BMX. A really vulnerable moment for me to be reduced to somebody that I had to be taken care of.
So tell me this, how does a 12-year-old who just experienced bullying get this diagnosis in the hospital a month and then thinking, okay, I'm coming out of this. Oh, no, I have a hole in my heart. I need another surgery. Like, how does a 12-year-old get through this?
I don't think a 12-year-old does. I matured in such a crazy fast amount of time, an unhealthy amount of time. Now, let's be clear. Nobody should have to do this. But I had to step back and say, I just have to stick through it. There has to be something that makes life worth living. There were definitely times where I was thinking, why am I still here? Especially after everything that could have gone wrong, not going wrong. I just had to reflect and go, there has to be a reason I'm still here. So I got to keep going, which isn't really something any 12-year-old should really have to go through. When I was in 6th grade, so recovering from my appendix and going in to my heart surgery, I actually did my heart surgery over Thanksgiving break. So we're coming up on 6 years now?
Congratulations.
So 7 years now, because it was 2012 when I got it done. So 7 years, no more problems. Been good, been clean, been healthy. I did that when I was going to charter school. So it was almost a private school, uniforms and all that. And I was even bullied there. And going through that, I almost saw myself as a special case. I took on a very victim mentality, which was super unhealthy going through that. I think it got me through a lot of it. If I had seen myself as just another normal kid that has that many problems, things would have gone really south. But at the same time, I think seeing myself as a victim was the wrong way to go about it. I closed myself off from support in so many ways that I kind of forced that upon myself, which is really sad.
Yeah. And how does someone handle the bullying that you've experienced? Like looking back, like what could you have done different? How do you be more open to the support that's around you?
For a kid, I don't know if there's a ton I did in the scenarios and in the situations that really helped me at all. I know I did a lot of things that weren't helping me. I would fight back and I would give them a reaction, which is exactly what people want whenever they're making fun of somebody or bullying them or punching them or whatever. All they want is a reaction. And as a loud little kid, I would definitely give them that reaction. But the bigger thing for me is knowing when to change your situation and being willing to do that. So I know my parents, they saw what I was going through. And instead of saying, okay, you got to stick through this, you got to keep doing it, they pulled me out. And that's one of the bigger reasons they did online school. Between me and my sister, traditional schooling just didn't click with her as easy as doing it independently and doing it at her own pace. She's a genius of a girl, but with teachers, you can't teach an entire class the same way and expect everybody to get it. And for her, that was that. So she came out and she took on a more unique schooling approach with online school. And then with me, it was bullying and getting away from that. Now, the trade-off there is, of course, you lose your social life. So with the bad guys go the good guys, unfortunately. But the fact that my parents were willing to change that scenario for me, and that, really my dad's life got flipped around because he had to stay at home and teach my sister and I. And he was willing to do that for us kids.
I know this show is a teen's perspective, but being a parent, it's very hard to see a child hurting.
Yeah.
So talk to us about how aware were you of your parents' feelings through it all, whether the bullying, the surgeries. Were you aware of that as a child?
I was really aware of my mom's feelings. That makes sense, stereotypical. I'm a real mama's boy. Love my mom. I will always love my mom. That's how my dad raised me, to be a mama's boy, to care about her. She really let me know I was loved, and especially being in the hospital and her always being by my side and always being willing to level with me and really explain things that doctors wouldn't explain to me and that my dad didn't know, really brought me closer to her and showed me that she really cared about me as a person rather than just me as her kid. And then with my dad, it was also this level of, I felt protected when I was around him. So a strong father figure in my life. And rightfully so. He's big, 6'2", big guy. He always made sure that whenever I was around him, he made me feel protected. And I really love that, especially coming from one of the most vulnerable years in my life where I couldn't take care of myself at all. I was on medication that I didn't know what it did. I had to do exercises that I didn't know if they were working. And I had to see doctors almost every month. Being there with my dad, even if it's just going to the store, being there next to him and walking through the aisles with him, I felt like he was watching over me more than me watching out for myself.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Now, you guys are a Christian family.
Yeah.
So going through all that as a 12-year-old, what were your thoughts as far as your faith?
That's a rough area for sure. That was definitely a rough patch in my life because I feel like I was never further from my faith than in that year. I purposefully distanced myself from God because as a 12-year-old, not really seeing the big picture, not seeing the miracles that are happening, or really anybody isn't going to see the miracles that are happening while they're in the hardship. It was really easy for me to just go, if there's a God, why would he let this happen? Why me? And I've done nothing terribly wrong in my life. Why do I deserve this? If a God exists like that, I don't want to be a part of his faith. So I'm going to distance myself from him. The weird thing is I didn't distance myself from church as much because I loved the community at church, which I think is really what brought me back to God, which makes sense. I mean, that's the entire idea behind Christianity is the community. But going to church, I found a group that actually cared for me and loved me. And I didn't feel like God did that, which is the most short-sighted. And looking back, of course, it looks like, yeah, why would you think that? Of course, God loves you if the group loves you. Yeah. For me, it was from God in particular, not necessarily from the church, but specifically from God. I felt very far, and it was very on purpose.
Yeah. So let's switch gears. Let's chat about parenting. Looking at where you are now, what advice could you give parents of teenagers?
Oh, just being willing to listen. That's the big one. I think my parents did a great job. The only times that I really felt tension was when they were trying to correct situations that they had no control over or that they had no insight on. Being willing to listen in those situations and just hear out the kid and not necessarily think that you know better than them, even if you do, even if you've been in a similar situation, especially with social media and society being as cynical as it is today. Having a pair of ears that just listens rather than gives feedback is really valuable for our generation today because we're going through such a transitional phase where communication and community aren't necessarily a physical thing. It can be completely virtual. And from that becomes a whole new level of pain because you can be committed to a friendship with somebody and they could think that you're just another person in their DMs. And that can rip apart somebody's heart just as much as a bad breakup almost. I think being willing to listen in those situations and maybe think that, yeah, maybe I don't know everything about the way they're communicating now is a really important thing. And that's something that I wish would have happened just a little more throughout high school.
Yeah, I think that's a great advice. When I'm working with teens and parents, that's one of the things that I kind of touch on as far as with parents is this is a different world. We can look at a child and think they're a child, like a teenager, and say, okay, we know more than you. But technically, we really don't know because this is the first time that this world is the way it is as far as with social media. I think, like you mentioned, social media brings on a completely different dynamic that what could have worked, years ago in the household, completely different now. I think that's great advice. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
So let's talk about where you are now and where you want to be in the future.
Ooh, where I'm at right now. Ooh, it's been a wild ride the last 8 months. Graduated towards the top of my class.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. But unlike the rest of the top of my class, I did not choose to go to college. So I came out with 30 hours from community college. I was thinking about going to, I actually chose to work and to go into the workforce rather than pursue college because I felt like that's really what I needed in my life at the time. It was definitely the right choice. If I had gone to college, first of all, I would have taken on a lot of debt. And the one thing about me is I know I have an addictive personality. Like not for others, like but for myself. If I start taking on debt, I don't feel bad about taking on more debt. It's a slippery slope and it's really dangerous. With college, I really wanted to make sure if I'm going to go to college, I have a nice fund built up in the back so I don't have to take on debt. Through that concern of, I don't want to take on debt, I've kind of found that I really enjoy working and working with people more than I enjoy being in school. And now I'm making enough money that I would rather have the experience in the workplace than the education. Especially, I feel like that's what really puts you aside and makes you stand out from other people on a resume now is experience. Unless you're going into a medical field, then of course, education is extremely important. But with actual face-to-face customer service kind of jobs, especially sales, which is what I do, experience speaks louder than a degree.
Yeah, I'm so glad, one, that you came on the show, because choosing not to go to college is very scary for a lot of parents. Their child not wanting to go to college because they put so much energy into grades throughout high school, and then to turn around and say, hey, I'm not going to college, it almost breaks parents' heart. But yeah. I'm glad for you to share your story, because the fact of the matter is college is not for everyone and is not the only pathway to success, happiness, and fulfillment. Right. So I'm glad you're able to share that.
Yeah. And the weird thing is for me, when I was growing up, it was always kind of assumed that I would be an engineer. I had a very mathematical mind and I always did very well in math. And I think that translated over in photography a lot, and just thinking in fractions almost, knowing composition really well, knowing lines that lead into a certain area. But I also think that there was a lot of pressure on me to go to college. And not only from my parents, but from everybody else. Any parent I would talk to of my friends was always like, so where are you going? Oh, you're going for oh, you should definitely go. Like, it's just a safe decision. I mean, worst case, you can like not use that degree and it'll look good on your resume. And I didn't want 4 years of college to just look good on my resume. Yeah. I wanted there to be a little more to that. And it was weird though, in my family, both my sister and I both took non-traditional routes. She did 2 years, but she does animation. And then I choose to go into photography and then into sales. So my parents, they were expecting it to be, oh, you're gonna go to college, you're gonna empty nesters, and then it went from that to, oh man, she's 20, she's still living at home, and now she's in New York all of a sudden, and you're working sales, and this is crazy. It's also scary for me. And for a lot of kids, it's hard for people to think, and for kids to think coming out of high school, I don't have to go to college. And I think for a lot of teens, there's a lot of pressure to go to college when maybe it's not meant for you. And so I find a lot of people there, especially in college, that they go for the social life. And for me, it was really scary to kind of give up the social life. Now, it wasn't as scary for me because I'm not used to it. If I was used to it, I don't think I could be where I am today, just because I would be so dependent on that social aspect of life that I don't think I could. I can't go out drinking with my buddies. I'm 18 and I can't go out and drink with 25 to 30-year-olds that I'm working with. But it's definitely an interesting step to go into that workforce instead of the community of college.
And share with us your parents' reaction when you first let them know, I'm not going to college, Mom.
Oh, man. They were suspicious at first. They're like, are you sure? Like, maybe that's not the best idea. But it started as me working it as a summer job more than anything. Maybe taking a gap year. Since I had 30 hours built up from community college, the idea of a gap year wasn't a bad thing. I could still do that and be on track with college if I took a gap. So they were open to that. But then when they started seeing how happy I was working, especially I do camera sales, so working with the equipment I know, working with people that are also enthusiastic about that, and being able to have a customer that comes in, talk to them, and have them leave the store having a better day than what it was when they came in. I think they started seeing how happy that made me, and they went from skeptical to very supportive.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is.
What's next for you?
Oh, man. I really would like to go full-time into photography. I love sales, don't get me wrong. But there is a lot of pressure that comes along with that. Not necessarily that there won't be that pressure in photography, but it's pressure that is on you. You don't have anybody overseeing you necessarily directly. When you're in the field taking photos, you're the one that determines if you get the shot. For me, I really miss that feeling of being out there. It's almost a therapy, being out there and creating art on my own. And I would love to do that full time and travel around the world especially with a Formula One team. I'm huge into racing. I love shooting Formula One. That's one of my favorite sports to shoot. That's the dream. I'm working towards that. it's cool because once you have experience on your resume, it all builds into connections. And especially in the photography and the arts industry, connections are everything.
You kind of mentioned before we started about your experience at Formula One. Got a chance to see Justin Timberlake and Stevie Wonder. So go ahead and give us a quick glimpse into that experience.
Oh man, it was crazy, especially at the time. I think I was 17, and being given that much access to sports and music stars that I have idolized throughout my childhood was really amazing. And for me, that's when I went from this idea of I don't have control of my life to I can make a difference in my life. Like what I'm doing right now, I built up to this. That was so cool for me because it really showed what I was capable of, and it kind of gave a glimpse to myself of, hey, you can do this. Like, you're not stuck at home just watching these guys. You can go out and you can be one of the guys that's on the stage taking pictures of them.
When it comes to teenagers, coaching is so effective because we use proven techniques that help teens identify goals and develop actionable plans to achieve them. If you're a parent and you want to learn how to use these coaching techniques to coach your own teen, visit us at coachyourteen.com. Wow, what a story. Have you had a similar experience as a parent? Did one of your teens go through a tough and scary surgery? We would love for you to share your story, so make sure you join our Facebook group. You can find us by searching A Teen's Perspective. There's a lot in this interview that I would love to discuss, but what I want to share with you from a coaching standpoint is how to decrease the amount of heated discussions. This is something I literally share with all of my clients, coaching parents and teens, and it's one simple statement. But this statement is so powerful. In fact, this statement probably has reduced millions and millions of arguments and probably have prevented billions more. All right, so are you ready for the statement? It's very, very simple. When you do blank, it makes me feel blank. You see, it's that simple. The reason why this statement works is because the number one reason discussions turn into fights is because of miscommunications. So I'll share an example with you. I was coaching parents and their team, and this statement literally helped their relationship. So what would happen was that whenever the parents would reprimand their teen would literally just pull his phone out, and it appears that he was texting, right? The parent is literally like, you did this wrong, and the teen will pull out his phone and just start texting. Now you can imagine how heated the discussion became, right? In fact, they even admitted that there were some broken phones after a few of these arguments. So we used a statement, right? So the parent went first, and the statement was, whenever we're talking to you and you pull out your phone, it makes us feel that you don't care about what we're saying, and it makes us feel that you're being disrespectful. So when the teen went, we discovered something. So the teen mentioned that whenever they are reprimanding him, it makes him feel shameful. So he actually felt shameful, and as a coping mechanism, he just pulled out his phone just to kind of cope with the shame. He wasn't texting. He wasn't ignoring them. In fact, he heard everything they said. He just felt bad, and that's how he handled it. So you can imagine what that revelation did for the parents. The parents are starting to look at their teen as he's not this disrespectful kid. He literally was just shameful. Another reason why this statement works really well is because it puts all of the attention on the action and not the person. Imagine if they were to tell their teen, hey, you are a disrespectful teen. I mean, there's no way that statement would improve the discussion, right? Because you're attacking a person and you feel attacked, so you're going to be defensive. So with this statement, it actually attacks the action. So it says that whenever you are texting or when you're on your phone when I'm talking to you, that is disrespectful. And then the attention is on the action and not on the person. This statement has a proven track record. It's proven to be successful, so make sure you use it. Well, I hope this interview will help in some way with the relationship between you and your teen. Thank you for listening, and thank you so much for all your support. Please review, rate, and subscribe, and share with a friend. Once again, I'm your host, Dr. RJ, and this is A Teen's Perspective. Let's go.